My name is Camille Renee Okafor. I'm 37 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst in Atlanta, Georgia. And on a Thursday night in late November, I was standing outside my own front door in the cold, with blood on my hand, locked out of the house I paid for. Derek had done it on purpose. He'd turned the deadbolt from the inside, killed the porch light, and gone silent. Like I didn't exist. Like 9 years of my life didn't exist. I stood there in 41-degree weather, my right hand wrapped around my wrist where the door frame had caught it, and I looked down at the key in my other hand. Not the key he knew about, the other one. And I smiled, because for the first time in 9 years, I was the one holding all the keys, every single one. And tomorrow morning, Derek Antoine Okafor was going to find out exactly what that meant. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, you are going to want to hear every second of this. Let me take you back to before that night, back to when I actually believed this man was the love of my life. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I was not a naive woman. I was not young and inexperienced and blinded by first love. I was 34 years old when things started falling apart. I had a master's degree in finance from Georgia State University. I had spent 11 years building a career analyzing risk literally professionally every single day. I knew how to read numbers. I knew how to spot patterns. I knew how to see through things that didn't add up. And I still didn't see it coming. That's the part that keeps me up some nights even now. Not the anger, the confusion. How does a woman who gets paid to find problems in financial systems miss the biggest problem sitting across from her at the dinner table every night? I'll tell you how. Because the problem wore a face I loved. His name was Derek Antoine Okafor, 41 years old, 6 feet, even broad shoulders, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was a real estate agent, good at his job when he put his mind to it, great at reading people, even better at making them feel seen. That was his gift. And for a long time, I thought that gift was meant for me. We met at a rooftop event in Buckhead on a Saturday evening in late August, 7 years before everything collapsed. A colleague had dragged me there against my will. I had spreadsheets to finish, I told her. She told me the spreadsheets would still be there Monday. She was right about that. She was also right that I needed to get out of my own head for one night. Derek found me standing near the railing looking out at the Atlanta skyline instead of talking to anyone. He didn't use a line.
You look like someone who came here for the skyline, not the small talk.
He just stood beside me, looked out at the same view, and said that. I laughed. I actually laughed, because he was exactly right. We talked for 3 hours that night. About Atlanta. About where we'd grown up. About what we actually wanted from our lives. Not the polished version people give at networking events, but the real version. He told me he'd grown up watching his father lose everything, trying to make something of himself, and that he'd promised himself he would build something lasting, something real, something that couldn't be taken away. I remember thinking, this man has depth. This man has intention. Lord, I was reading the wrong data. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. And those 2 years, I want to be honest with you, those 2 years were genuinely good. He was attentive. He remembered things. He showed up. When my mother, Gloria, was rushed to Piedmont Hospital with chest pains one February, Derek drove 4 hours from Savannah. He'd been there on a property deal and was sitting in that waiting room when I arrived. He didn't call ahead. He just came. I cried when I saw him standing there. My mother grabbed his hand and said he was a good man.
You're a good man, Derek.
She meant it then. We both did. That's the thing about manipulation at its finest. It doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with moments like that. Moments that get stored in your heart like deposits in an account. So that later, when the withdrawals start, you keep telling yourself the balance is still positive. We got married in October at a venue in Inman Park, 120 guests, copper and ivory, everything the most beautiful evening of my life. My best friend Josephine Baptiste Jo stood beside me as my maid of honor. Jo had been my person since our first year at Georgia State. She was a family law attorney, now sharp as they came, and the kind of friend who told you the truth even when you didn't want to hear it. At the reception, Joe pulled me aside and spoke very quietly.
He's charming, Camille. Just make sure you know the difference between charming and good.
I told her she was overthinking it. I told her she spent too much time in divorce court. She smiled and let it go. Joe was always smart enough to know when to plant a seed and walk away. And then there was Terrence. Derek's younger brother, by 4 years 37 at the time of our wedding, easy laugh, always ready with a joke, the kind of person who made every room feel warmer. Terrence had been going through a rough stretch financially the year before our wedding, a deal gone bad, some debt he was too proud to talk about. Derek had mentioned it casually, and without thinking twice, I had quietly moved $6,000 into Terrence's account. I didn't tell Derek. I didn't want it to feel like charity between brothers. I just wanted him to have breathing room. Terrence called me 3 days later, his voice thick with emotion. He said he didn't even know what to say. I told him family doesn't need to say anything. I told him to pay it forward someday. For 6 years after that, Terrence called me his sister. Not sister-in-law, sister. And I believed him. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me stay in the good years a little longer, because you need to feel what I felt before I show you how it ended. You need to understand what it cost me to lose it. Our life in those first 3 years had a rhythm I loved. We lived in a 2,200 square foot house on Wyndham Lane in Buckhead. Hardwood floors, a big kitchen, a back porch, where I'd sit on Sunday mornings with my coffee and listen to the neighborhood wake up. Derek would come out eventually, sleep warm and unhurried, and we'd sit out there for an hour sometimes just talking about nothing and everything. About the neighbors. About where we'd travel someday. About whether we wanted children, a conversation we kept circling but never landing on. Those Sunday mornings on that porch were the best part of my week. Then sometime in year 3, Derek started suggesting I let him handle our finances. At the time, his real estate business had hit a slow patch. The market was shifting. Deals were taking longer to close. He said managing our joint accounts would give him a sense of contribution while his income fluctuated. I understood that. I respected it even. A man's pride is a real thing, and I had been raised to honor it within reason. So I let him in. I kept my salary direct deposited into our joint account. I kept my name on everything technically, but I stepped back from the day-to-day. I told myself I trusted this man. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. I always keep a backup plan. That's something I've said my entire professional life. It's the first thing I tell junior analysts on their first week. Never put everything in one basket. Always know where the exits are. Always read every single document before you sign it. I said those words at work every day, and somehow I forgot to apply them at home. Looking back now, I can see exactly where I left the door open. I just didn't know yet that someone was already walking through it. Year 4 was when the temperature in our house started to change. Not all at once. Not in a way I could point to and say there. That's when it shifted. It was more like the way a season changes in Atlanta, you don't notice it happening. And then one morning you walk outside and the air is different and you realize summer has been gone for weeks without you registering it. Derek's real estate business had steadied somewhat, but his mood hadn't. There was a restlessness in him that hadn't been there before. A tension that lived just beneath the surface of everything, the way he answered questions, a half second too sharply the way his jaw set when I talked about a project at work, the way he'd go quiet at dinner in a manner that felt less like peace and more like calculation. I told myself he was under pressure. I told myself this was what long-term partnership looked like, not the rooftop in Buckhead, not the Sunday mornings anymore, but the harder, quieter work of staying. I was half right. It was work. I just didn't know yet that only one of us was doing it. The joint account was his territory now fully. When I asked about the balance casually, the way you ask about the weather, he'd give me a number that sounded reasonable and change the subject.
I'm handling it. We're investing. Building something. You focus on your clients. Let me focus on us.
And because I wanted to believe that we were building something, I let it go. Every time. Joe noticed before I did. Of course she did. We had lunch one afternoon at a place on Peachtree Street, just the two of us, the way we tried to do at least once a month. I was telling her about a weekend Derek and I had spent in Savannah, how he'd surprised me with a dinner reservation at a restaurant I'd mentioned once months earlier. I was smiling, telling the story. Jo was listening with that particular look. She had the one that meant she was thinking something she hadn't decided whether to say yet.
Does he still do that? Surprise you like that?
I thought about it. Really thought about it. And I realized no. The last time he'd done something like that had been at least a year ago. Maybe longer. He's just busy, I said.
Sure.
Jo said that quietly, and she took a sip of her water and let the subject go. But the seed was planted. The first major crack came at a family dinner at Derek's mother's house in Decatur, a Sunday in early spring. The whole Okafor family, about 14 people, crowded around two pushed-together tables in Miss Vivian's dining room. I had brought a sweet potato pie I'd made from scratch. Terrence grabbed my hand when I walked in and greeted me warmly, and the room laughed. It felt warm and real. We were maybe 40 minutes into dinner when I mentioned a client presentation I'd given that week, a risk analysis for a mid-size investment firm, something I was genuinely proud of. I wasn't bragging. I was just talking the way people talk at family dinners about their week. Derek looked up from his plate. He smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes.
Don't mind her. Camille's real good at numbers on paper. Not so good at the things that actually matter in a marriage.
Then he laughed. And because he was laughing, a few other people laughed too nervous laughter. The kind people produce when they don't know what else to do with an uncomfortable moment. I felt my face go still. Not hot, not flushed. Still, like something inside me had just quietly turned off. Miss Vivian glanced at me from across the table. Her expression was unreadable. Terrence, sitting 2 seats down, stared at his plate. Nobody said anything. I smiled. I picked up my fork. I finished my dinner. That night in the car driving home, I spoke. That comment at dinner had hurt Derek.
It was a joke, Camille. Why do you always have to make things serious?
It didn't feel like a joke.
Because you're too sensitive. You've always been too sensitive.
He turned up the radio. Conversation over. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the lights of Atlanta pass by my window, and I thought about what Jo had said, about the difference between charming and good. The weeks after that dinner were quieter on the surface, but louder underneath. Derek started coming home later. Not every night, just enough nights that the pattern started to register. He always had an explanation ready. Client dinner, property showing, drinks with Terrence. The explanations were seamless. Too seamless, maybe, in the way that very practiced things tend to be. Then one evening in late April, I was putting Derek's jacket away. He had dropped it over the arm of the couch when he came in, which he always did. Something fell out of the inside pocket. A folded receipt from the Lowe's Hotel in Midtown Atlanta. I picked it up. Room service for 2, a Tuesday evening. A Tuesday when Derek had told me he was showing a property in Alpharetta until 9 at night. The Lowe's Hotel was not in Alpharetta. The Lowe's Hotel was 12 minutes from our house. I stood in the hallway holding that receipt for a long time. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking and go still. Long enough for my brain to start doing what it always did under pressure, sorting, analyzing, looking for the alternative explanation that would make the data add up differently. Maybe he'd met a client there. Maybe it was a business dinner that turned into room service. Maybe there was a completely reasonable explanation that I just wasn't seeing yet. I folded the receipt back up. I put it in my own pocket. I went back to the kitchen and finished doing the dishes. But the thing about working in finance is that, you know this, when a number doesn't fit the pattern, you don't ignore it. You flag it. You keep watching. I started watching. And later that night, when Derek was in the shower, I picked up his jacket one more time. Not because I was looking for anything else, just because the receipt was still bothering me and I wanted to hold it again, to see if it felt different the second time. It did feel different, because this time I found something else. A folded business card. Plain white. Just a name and a phone number. The name on the card was Naomi. I didn't confront him that night. I want to be clear about that because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Camille, you found a receipt and a business card with a woman's name on it and you just went to bed.
Yes.
I did. Because I had spent 11 years in finance learning that the worst mistake an analyst can make is acting on incomplete information. You don't blow up a position based on one data point. You gather more. You build a case. Then you move. At least that's what I told myself. The truth, if I'm being fully honest, is that I was also afraid. Not of Derek, not yet. Afraid of what confirming the truth would mean. Afraid of what it would do to the life I had spent 9 years building. My parents' marriage had ended when I was 12. My father packed 2 bags on a Wednesday afternoon and was gone by Thursday morning. My mother spent the next 3 years putting herself back together piece by piece. I had watched that. I had felt that. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the degrees and the career and the capable exterior, lived a 12-year-old girl who had decided very early that she would never let her marriage become that. So I held the business card. I noted the name, and I watched. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, I had seen the name Naomi appear 3 times on Derek's phone screen. Not the content of the messages, just the name flashing up in notifications he'd quickly turn face down. I noticed him stepping outside to take calls twice in one weekend, both times speaking in a voice too low to carry through the walls. I watched him check his phone at dinner with an attention he hadn't given me in months. On a Sunday morning in early May, a morning that should have been a porch coffee morning, except those had stopped happening somewhere in year 4 without either of us formally acknowledging it. I sat across from Derek at the kitchen table and spoke calmly. "Who is Naomi?" The reaction was immediate, not guilt that would come later. First came something colder. His eyes went flat the way a screen goes dark when the power cuts. Then they sharpened.
Where did you hear that name?
"Your phone." I had seen it come up.
You've been going through my phone.
"I've been sitting across from you at dinner watching notifications come up on a screen you keep flipping over." "That's not going through your phone. That's having eyes." He pushed back from the table. He stood up. And then he did something I had never seen him do before. He laughed. Not a warm laugh. A short, dismissive sound.
Naomi is a client, Camille. A property buyer. Are you serious right now?
He shook his head slowly, the way you do with someone who is trying your patience.
This is what we're doing on a Sunday morning. You're interrogating me about my clients.
I'm asking a question.
You're accusing me. There's a difference.
He picked up his coffee mug. He rinsed it in the sink with his back to me.
You know what your problem is? You spend all day looking for things that are wrong in other people's finances, and you come home and do the same thing to your marriage. You're always looking for a problem, Camille. You're going to find one eventually, whether it's there or not.
I sat very still. That was the first time he used my own profession against me. The first time he took the thing I was most proud of and turned it into a character flaw. And the terrible, shameful truth is that it worked at least partially. I went back to my coffee. I told myself maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was pattern matching where there was no pattern. But the business card was still in my nightstand drawer. I hadn't thrown it away. 3 days later, Joe called to check in. A regular Thursday evening call. Something we'd maintained for years. I found myself telling her about the receipt, about the name on the phone, about the conversation in the kitchen. There was a pause on her end.
Camille, what you're describing is not a rough patch. That is a pattern.
He said she's a client.
He may well have clients named Naomi. But the way you're describing his reaction, the immediate defensiveness, the pivot to attacking you, that's not an innocent man's response. An innocent man says, babe, she's a client, here's her listing. He doesn't make you feel crazy for asking.
I was quiet.
I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you what I hear. Will you at least keep your eyes open?
I told her I would. What I didn't tell her was that 2 nights earlier, while Derek was in the shower, I had found something else. I had been looking for a pen in the drawer of his nightstand. Genuinely. Just looking for a pen. And I found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a phone charger. A printed bank statement. Not from our joint account. From a separate account I had never seen before. Under both our names. A joint investment account with a balance of $260,000. $260,000 that Derek had never once mentioned to me. I photographed it on my phone. I put it back exactly where I found it. And I lay awake in the dark beside my husband for 3 hours that night, doing math in my head, thinking about where that money had come from, thinking about how long it had been accumulating, thinking about the fact that my name was on it, and that I had never signed a single document to open it. Or had I started going back through every piece of paperwork Derek had ever put in front of me. Tax filings, insurance documents, property records, things I had signed quickly, trusting him. Because that's what you do with your husband. That's what partnership is supposed to mean. And then on a Wednesday evening while Derek was out, he said he was showing a property in Sandy Springs. I sat at our kitchen table with every document I could find. And I read every single line. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. And on the 4th document, a tax filing from 3 years prior, I found my signature on a line I did not remember signing. A line that listed me as co-owner of a joint investment account. The account number matched the statement I had found in his drawer. I put the document down. I sat in the quiet kitchen of the house I paid for. Outside, the Atlanta night was warm and ordinary. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was playing music softly. A dog was barking 2 streets over. And I thought, he didn't hide this from me. He hid it in plain sight. He put my name on it and counted on me never looking closely enough to find it. He forgot who he married. But the worst of it, the part that made my chest feel hollow, was that I still didn't know how deep this went. I had one statement. I had one signature. I had a name on a business card and a receipt from a hotel 12 minutes from our house. I needed more. And I was going to get it. What I didn't know yet was that the truth was already moving toward me from a direction I never would have predicted. I sent Joe the photograph of the bank statement the morning after I found it. I didn't explain much. I just sent the image with one line. Found this in his nightstand. Never knew it existed. My name is on it. Can you look into it? Joe called me back within the hour. I could tell from her voice that she was already in lawyer mode, measured, precise thinking 3 steps ahead.
Camille, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not touch that account. Do not call the bank. Do not say a single word to Derek about this yet. I am going to do some research and I'm going to call you back by end of week. Can you do that?
I told her I could.
And Camille.
She paused.
I need you to start being very careful about what you say in that house, about what you leave on your phone, about who you trust.
I asked her what she meant by that last part.
I mean exactly what I said.
I hung up and stood in my office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta. I looked out at a city I had lived in for 15 years. And for the first time in this whole unraveling, I felt genuinely afraid. Not of the account. Not even of Derek's reaction if he found out I knew. Afraid because Joe Baptiste, who had seen the inside of more broken marriages than most people would in 10 lifetimes, had just told me to be careful. And Joe did not say things she didn't mean. I went home that evening and acted like everything was normal. I made dinner. I asked Derek about his day. I smiled in the right places. I was so calm that later I would look back and realize something. That was the night I started becoming someone new. Not the woman who trusted everything. The woman who watched everything. Joe called back 4 days later. What she told me took the floor out from under me. Not because it was shocking in the way that surprises you, but because it was shocking in the way that confirms what some part of you already knew and had been refusing to accept. The investment account had been opened 6 years ago, year 3 of our marriage. The same year Derek had asked to take over our finances. It had been funded primarily through transfers from our joint checking account, money that Derek had been moving in increments small enough not to trigger alarm. Over the course of years, the current balance had grown to just over $300,000 through a combination of those deposits and investment returns. And for the last 4 months, Derek had been in contact with a private attorney, not the family attorney we'd used for the house, a different one, about restructuring the account into his sole name. He was preparing to cut me out, quietly, methodically, the same way he had built it, in increments, carefully, counting on me not to notice until it was done.
There's something else,
Joe said. I gripped the phone tighter.
The attorney he's using, I know him. He handles high-asset divorce prep. Derek isn't just trying to move money, Camille. He's getting ready to file. And when he does, he's planning to present that account as his separate property, his business investment, and argue you have no claim to it.
The room was very quiet. He's been planning this, I said. Not a question.
It looks that way. For a while.
I sat with that for a moment. 6 years of Sunday mornings on the porch. 6 years of telling myself we were building something. And the whole time he had been building an exit. A carefully constructed, financially engineered exit designed to leave me with nothing. That evening, Derek came home in a good mood. The particular brightness he got when he felt things were going his way. He kissed me on the cheek. He poured himself a drink. And then he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and spoke casually.
You know, I've been thinking. With how demanding your job has gotten, maybe it makes sense for you to scale back. Or even step away for a while. Let me carry things financially for a change.
I looked at him.
A woman with a husband like me doesn't need to work. Honestly, Camille, it's a little embarrassing at this point. People think I can't provide.
Something went cold inside me. Not hot, cold. The difference between fire and ice is that ice is quiet and ice lasts longer. I'm not leaving my job, Derek. His expression shifted. Just slightly. The pleasant mask slipping 1 centimeter.
I'm not asking you to leave it forever. I'm asking you to consider what's more important, your career or your marriage.
That's not a choice I should have to make. He set his glass down. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice I had never heard from him before.
You think you're so smart with your little spreadsheets. You think you know how everything works. But you don't know how the real world works, Camille. Not the part that actually matters.
Then he stood up. He took his drink. And he went to watch television. I stayed at the kitchen table. My hands were flat on the surface in front of me. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The weeks that followed were the worst of the marriage. And I say that knowing what came after. Derek became more controlling, more unpredictable. He started questioning where I was going, who I was seeing, what I was spending. He began intercepting mail. He changed the passwords on our joint banking app. And he told me he would set me up with my own login later. A later that never came. He started cutting me off from the people who mattered. He complained about Jo constantly, saying she was negative, saying she was filling my head with ideas, saying she didn't respect our marriage. He screened my calls when he was nearby, making pointed comments about how long I had been on the phone and who I was talking to. My mother called one Sunday afternoon. Derek picked up the house phone before I could get to it. He told her I was resting and couldn't talk. And then he hung up. I didn't find out until 3 days later when Mama called my cell. Baby, is everything okay over there? I've been trying to reach you. And then one night, a Thursday. A nothing Thursday. Not an anniversary of anything. I came home 20 minutes later than usual because my train had been delayed. Derek was in the kitchen. He turned when I walked in.
Where were you?
I told him. The train.
You should have called.
Derek, it was 20 minutes.
I said you should have called.
He moved toward me, and I stepped back automatically. Not because I'd planned to, but because something in my body knew before my brain did, and he saw me step back. Something in his face darkened. He didn't hit me that night, but he grabbed my arm. Hard enough to leave a mark. He leaned in close and spoke very quietly.
Don't you ever make me wait and wonder again? You understand me.
I said yes. My voice came out steady. I don't know how. He let go. He went back to the stove. He finished making his dinner like nothing had happened. I went to the bathroom. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and looked at the red marks on my arm where his fingers had been. And I thought about what my mother used to say when I was little. Whenever I was scared of something, whenever the world felt too big and too dangerous and too out of my control, she would say something. She would say a smart woman always keeps a spare key. To her house, to her money, and to herself. I had been so focused on keeping other people's money safe. I had forgotten to keep my own key. That night, after Derek fell asleep, I lay in the dark and made a decision. No more waiting. No more watching from a distance. No more telling myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. It was time to start building my way out. But what happened 2 weeks later, what Joe uncovered, what I discovered about Naomi, would change every calculation I had made. Because the truth wasn't just bigger than I thought. It was coming from a direction I never could have imagined. Joe called me on a Tuesday morning while I was eating breakfast alone at the kitchen table. Derek had left early. No explanation, which had become its own kind of explanation.
I found her.
Joe said that, and I set down my coffee cup. Naomi
Park. 30 years old. Lives in a condo over in Old Fourth Ward. She's not a property buyer, Camille. She was never a client.
Joe paused, and I could hear her choosing her next words carefully.
She reached out to my office 2 weeks ago. Through my firm's general intake line, she said she was looking for a family law attorney because she had been financially defrauded by someone she had been in a relationship with. She gave a description of the situation. My paralegal flagged it and brought it to me because Camille, the financial details she described matched exactly what I had been researching about Derek's account.
The kitchen went very still around me.
She didn't know about you at first. She knew he was married, but he had told her the marriage had been over for years, that you two were only together on paper, that he was in the process of separating his finances before filing for divorce. He told her he was building something for the two of them, a future. He told her he needed her help, that if she contributed her savings to the investment account, he could leverage it with his own assets and double her money within 18 months.
I closed my eyes.
She gave him $78,000, Camille. Her entire savings. Money she had spent 7 years putting away. He deposited it into the joint investment account, the same account with your name on it, and told her it was working, that the returns were coming. For 8 months, she believed him. Then the communication started getting sparse. Then he started avoiding her calls. Then she hired someone to look into it and found out the account had been restructured multiple times. The money was completely inaccessible to her, and...
Joe stopped. And what?
And she found out he wasn't separated from you at all, that he had never filed anything, that your marriage was fully intact, that everything he had told her was a lie from the beginning.
I sat at that kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Here is what I want to tell you about that moment, because I think it matters, and I think some of you will understand this in a way that other people can't. My first feeling was not anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was something colder and more exhausting than either of those things. It was the feeling of a very large, very heavy door closing on a version of your life that you had believed in completely. 9 years. Not just the last few years of control and fear and red marks on my arm. All of it. The rooftop in Buckhead. The hospital waiting room in February. The Sunday mornings on the porch. The wedding in October with copper and ivory everything, and Joe standing beside me and my mother holding my hands before I walked down the aisle. All of it had been constructed on a foundation that was never real.
Camille.
Joe's voice was careful.
I know this is a lot. Take whatever time you need, but I need you to hear the rest.
I told her to go ahead.
Naomi wants to meet with you. Not to cause problems, I want to be clear about that. She's not angry at you. She knows you're a victim in this the same way she is. She has documentation, Camille. Bank transfer records, text messages, emails where Derek explicitly promised her returns on her money, emails where he talked about you, about what he was planning to do with the joint account, about getting your signature on documents you wouldn't read closely enough to understand.
That last part hit me somewhere specific, somewhere precise. Like a key turning in a lock, documents you wouldn't read closely enough to understand. He had said that about me, to her, the woman he was using while using me. He had sat down and written those words about his own wife, the woman who spent her professional life reading financial documents for a living, and he had believed them completely. I thought about the dinner in Decatur, about the laughter around the table, about his voice saying, "Don't mind her. She's good at numbers on paper, not so good at the things that actually matter." I thought about the kitchen table conversation. You think you're so smart with your little spreadsheets. You don't know how the real world works. He had not been insulting me carelessly. He had been telling me exactly what he believed. He had looked at everything I was and decided it amounted to nothing he needed to take seriously. "Set up the meeting," I said.
Are you sure you're ready?
Joe exhaled slowly. "Set it up." We met 4 days later at Joe's office on Peachtree Street, a Saturday morning, the building mostly empty. I arrived first. I sat in Joe's conference room and looked out at the Atlanta skyline and thought about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I am feeling too much to process any one thing cleanly. Naomi Park walked in, and I understood immediately why Derek had chosen her. She was quiet, careful, the kind of person who measured her words before she spent them. She was also, and I say this because it matters to understanding what happened between us, clearly frightened. Not of me, of the situation, of what acknowledging the full truth out loud was going to cost her. She sat down across from me. She looked at her hands. Then she looked up.
I'm sorry.
She said that softly.
I know that probably doesn't mean much coming from me. But I need you to know I didn't know the truth of your situation until it was too late to make a different choice. And I'm sorry for my part in any of it.
I looked at her for a moment, and then I spoke. He lied to both of us. The blame for that sits with him. Something in her face shifted. Like a muscle she'd been holding rigid for months finally let go. She opened a folder and slid it across the table. Bank transfer records. Screenshots of text messages. Derek in his own words making promises, constructing lies, describing his wife as someone too distracted by her career to pay attention to what mattered. Email chains where he detailed his plan to consolidate the investment account into his sole name before filing for divorce, leaving both Naomi and me with nothing. I read every page, slowly, carefully, the way I read every financial document I had ever been given professionally. And when I was done, I closed the folder and looked up at Naomi. Will you sign a formal witness statement?
Yes.
She didn't hesitate. Joe, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, made a small sound that might have been relief. We sat in that conference room for another 2 hours, not as enemies, not even really as strangers by the end of it, as two women who had been handed the same lie by the same man and were now together deciding what to do with the truth. Driving home that afternoon, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. The text read, "He knows you've been talking to people. Be careful tonight." I stared at that message at a red light on Peachtree Street. My heart was beating fast, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know how they knew. I didn't know what careful tonight was going to mean. But I knew this. I was done being careful in the way I had been careful for 4 years. Quiet, careful. Accommodating, careful. Shrinking myself, careful. I was about to be a different kind of careful entirely. I pulled into our driveway. The porch light was off. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the television. And standing in the living room, visible through the glass, was Derek. Still, watching the driveway, waiting. His expression, even from that distance, was not the expression of a man who was worried. It was the expression of a man who thought he was still in control. He had no idea how wrong he was. I walked through that front door with my face completely neutral. Not forced neutral, the kind that takes effort and shows at the edges. Genuinely, deliberately, professionally neutral. The same face I wore when I walked into a client meeting knowing their portfolio was about to take a hit, and I needed them calm before I gave them the numbers. The face that said, "I have information you don't have yet, and I am in complete control of when and how you receive it." Derek was standing in the living room. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. He was watching me.
Where were you?
He asked. "Joe's office," I said. "We had lunch and lost track of time." I set my bag down on the entryway table unhurried. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry." He studied me for a moment, looking for something in my face. Whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it because I had already decided somewhere on Peachtree Street between Joe's office and our driveway that he was never going to find anything in my face again that I didn't put there deliberately.
You've been spending a lot of time with Joe lately.
He said. "She's my best friend," I said simply. "She always has been." He made a sound, not quite words, just a low dismissive note in the back of his throat, and turned back to the television. I went to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I stood at the sink and looked out at the dark backyard and breathed. That night after Derek fell asleep, I lay in the dark and something happened that I have tried many times to describe accurately and never quite managed. It wasn't a decision exactly, it was more like a rearrangement. Like furniture being moved in a room you've lived in so long you stop noticing how it was arranged. Suddenly, things were in different positions and the room made more sense, and you couldn't believe you had tolerated the old arrangement for as long as you had. I thought about my mother's voice. A smart woman always keeps a spare key. To her house, to her money, and to herself. I had let Derek take the key to my money. I had let him slowly and methodically convince me to hand it over in the name of partnership and trust, and what I thought love looked like. And then piece by piece, he had used that access to build something designed entirely to benefit himself, while simultaneously making me smaller, quieter, more isolated, more dependent, so that by the time he was ready to pull the final lever, I would have nowhere to turn and nothing to stand on. He had miscalculated one thing. He had forgotten, or more likely never truly believed, that I was the woman who built the backup plan before she needed it. Every time, without exception. It was not just a professional habit. It was who I was down to the bone. And then something else moved through me. Something that started quiet and grew. Not anger. I had felt anger for months now, and anger I had learned was loud and costly. This was different. This was the feeling of a very specific kind of clarity, the kind that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. Something inside me went quiet. Not sad quiet, not defeated quiet, dangerous quiet. The next morning, I called Jo from my car in the parking garage at work, engine running, doors locked, and I told her everything I had been thinking since the night before. I want to move, I said. Not eventually, now. I want to know exactly what my legal position is. I want to know every option I have, and I want to start executing before he gets any further with his own plan. Jo was quiet for exactly 3 seconds.
I've been waiting for this call for about 4 months.
We met that evening, not at her office this time, not anywhere Derek might track through my phone's location. We met at a coffee shop in Decatur, far enough from Buckhead that running into anyone who knew us was unlikely. I brought every document I had photographed. Jo brought her research. She laid it out clearly the way she always did, no softening, no cushioning, just the facts in the order I needed to hear them. The investment account, she explained, had been opened under both our names and had been funded in part through our joint marital assets. Under Georgia law, marital assets accumulated during the marriage were subject to equitable division regardless of which spouse's name they were under or who had managed them. Furthermore, and this was the part that made me set down my coffee cup slowly, because I had been listed as co-owner on the account from the beginning, and because I had signed joint tax filings for 9 consecutive years that referenced our combined financial holdings, I had a legally defensible claim to that account that Derek's private attorney was apparently hoping I would never discover.
He needed you not to know,
Jo said.
That was the entire strategy. Keep you in the dark, get you to sign a separation agreement that waived your rights to the account under the guise of simplifying the division of assets and walk away with $300,000 that you funded with your own salary.
I nodded slowly. What do we do?
3 things,
Jo said.
First, we file for an emergency asset freeze, a court order that prevents either party from moving or liquidating marital assets while the divorce proceedings are pending. That locks the investment account in place before he can transfer it. Second, we file for divorce simultaneously. I have the paperwork ready we can file within the week. Third, we compile everything the bank records Naomi's witness statement, the evidence of financial fraud, and we present it as a unified case.
She looked at me steadily.
If we do this right, Camille, he walks away with nothing he stole. And you walk away with everything that was already yours.
I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting at the back of my mind since the night before. Jo, who sent me that text, he knows you've been talking to people, who knew enough to warn me. Jo folded her hands on the table.
Naomi sent it. She saw Derek's phone when he was in the shower at her apartment. He'd gone there that same afternoon after she'd already met with us. He'd gotten a call from someone telling him you'd been asking questions. She didn't know exactly what he knew or what he was planning to do with it, but she was scared enough to warn you.
I thought about Naomi Park sitting across from me in Jo's conference room, the careful way she moved, the apology she'd offered before she'd said anything else. He had used her the same way he had used me, as a means to an end, a resource to be extracted, a person whose value was entirely transactional. The difference was that Naomi had seen his true face a year earlier than I had. She had already lived through the disillusionment and come out the other side of it, and she had chosen at personal risk, knowing Derek would find out, to make sure I was not blindsided. I made a decision about Naomi in that moment that I have never regretted. The next morning, I began documenting everything. Every incident of control. Every night the door had been locked. The marks on my arm. Dates, times, descriptions, photographs where I had them. I kept the record in an encrypted file on a cloud account Derek did not know existed, a backup server I had maintained since graduate school, out of professional habit, accessible only through an email address I had never shared with him. He had given me access to one key and hidden all the others. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly making copies for longer than he realized. Joe filed the emergency asset freeze on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the investment account was locked. Derek came home that evening in his usual state, unbothered, slightly distracted, carrying the low-level arrogance of a man who believed everything was still going according to his plan. I was in the kitchen when he walked in. I looked up. I smiled. "How was your day?" I asked.
Fine,
He said.
busy.
"Good," I said, and I turned back to the stove. He had no idea. Not yet. And I intended to keep it that way for exactly as long as I needed to. But there was one more thing Joe had told me that evening in Decatur. One piece of information that had rearranged the furniture in the room one final time, and this time what it revealed wasn't just Derek. It was Terrence. Joe had said it quietly, almost carefully, the way you say something you know is going to land hard.
Camille, the person who helped Derek set up the transfer paperwork to try to move the account into his sole name, the person who had been acting as an informal financial intermediary, it's Terrence.
I had stared at her across the table. Terrence, who had called me his sister for 6 years. Terrence, whose debt I had quietly cleared without telling a soul because I wanted him to have breathing room. Terrence, who had grabbed my hand at family dinners and made the room feel warmer just by being in it. Terrence, who had known exactly what his brother was doing and had helped him do it anyway. I drove home that night in silence. No music. No phone calls. Just the Atlanta lights sliding past my windows and the quiet inside me that was not sad and not angry, but something altogether more purposeful than either. I thought about the key in my hand on that cold November porch. And I thought every lock has a mechanism. And I had just found the last one. The 3 weeks between Joe filing the asset freeze and the court date were the strangest weeks of my life. Strange because on the surface, nothing had changed. I still woke up in the same house. I still made coffee in the same kitchen. I still sat across from Derek at the same dinner table 3 or 4 nights a week, watching him talk about his day, watching him check his phone, watching him perform the role of a man who had everything figured out. And I smiled in the right places and asked the right questions and gave him absolutely nothing to work with. Inside, I was running a parallel operation with the precision I usually reserved for my most complex client portfolios. Joe and I spoke every day, always from my car, always with the engine running, always in a different location. We had established a system. I used a prepaid phone I had purchased with cash from a Walmart in College Park, a 20-minute drive from Buckhead on a Tuesday afternoon when Derek thought I was at a work lunch. The phone lived in a zippered pocket inside my gym bag, which Derek had never once opened in 9 years of marriage, because he considered the gym my domain and had no interest in it. The emergency asset freeze had gone through without incident. The investment account, $312,000 at last count, was locked. Neither party could touch it, transfer it, or liquidate it without a court order. Derek did not know this yet. As far as he was aware, his plan was still on schedule. I needed to keep it that way. Joe had filed the divorce petition simultaneously with the asset freeze, but under a procedural mechanism that allowed a brief delay in formal service, meaning Derek would not be officially served the divorce papers until we were ready. We had a window. I intended to use every hour of it. Naomi had signed her formal witness statement, 12 pages notarized, covering everything. The financial transfers, the promises Derek had made. The emails where he had described in his own words his plan to consolidate the joint account before filing for divorce. She had also provided her complete bank records showing the $78,000 transfer, her life savings moved into the account Derek controlled under the pretense of a shared future that had never existed. I had compiled my own documentation in parallel, 14 months of records, dates and descriptions of every controlling incident, photographs of the marks on my arm from the night in the kitchen, screenshots of moments where Derek had blocked my mother's calls, screened my communications, monitored my location, a timeline of the financial manipulation cross-referenced with the joint account statements showing exactly when and how money had moved.
It was the most organized evidence file I'd seen in 20 years of family law.
Joe said that. I told her I had spent my career building models out of data. This was just a different kind of model. And through all of it, through every encrypted file and every prepaid phone call and every evening I spent at the kitchen table acting like a woman who had accepted her circumstances, Derek was becoming more confident, more expansive, more himself in the way that people become more themselves when they believe they are about to win something. He started talking about the future. His future phrased as our future, but the architecture of it was entirely his. He mentioned a property he was considering buying in Midtown. He talked about potentially bringing Terrence in as a business partner. He seemed lighter, almost buoyant in the way that a man looks when a long-running plan is approaching its conclusion, and he can already taste the outcome. And then on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before the court date, he sat down across from me after dinner and slid a folder across the table.
I need you to look at this.
He said that.
It's some investment restructuring paperwork. Just a formality moving some assets around for tax purposes. I need your signature on a couple of pages.
I looked at the folder. I did not open it. What kind of restructuring? I asked.
It's complicated.
He waved a hand.
You don't need to understand the details, that's what I'm here for. Just need your signature to keep things moving.
He leaned back in his chair, comfortable, certain.
You trust me, right?
I looked at him across the table, at the ease in his posture, at the particular quality of his smile, the one that had worked on me for 9 years because I had wanted so badly for it to be real. Of course, I said. I pulled the folder toward me. I opened it. I turned to the signature page, the page he was pointing to, the one near the back where the legal language was densest and most people's eyes glazed over, and I looked at it carefully, because that was what I always did, because that was who I was. It was a waiver. Buried inside 3 pages of legitimate-looking restructuring language was a clause in which I, Camille Renee Okafor, voluntarily relinquished my claim to any jointly held investment accounts currently under litigation or subject to court proceedings. It was elegant, actually, if you didn't read carefully, if you trusted the person handing it to you. If you believed, as Derek had always believed, I believed that finance was his domain and you were just along for the ride. He had no idea that Joe had prepared a different document for exactly this moment. A limited power of attorney already notarized, already filed with the court authorizing Joe to act on my behalf in all financial and legal proceedings related to the divorce. A document I had signed 3 days earlier. A document that meant that even if I had signed Derek's waiver, it would have been superseded by the filing already on record. But I didn't sign his waiver. I signed my name on the page deliberately clearly and slid the folder back across the table. Derek picked it up without looking at it and set it aside.
That's all I needed. Thank you.
Of course, I said again. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because he had never once considered that I might be operating on a different level than the one he had assigned me to, was that I had switched the document while his back was turned to refill his drink. The page he thought carried my signature on his waiver actually carried my signature on a copy of the power of attorney confirmation, worded identically at the top where the casual eye would land. His waiver sat in my gym bag, unsigned. I smiled at him across the dinner table and asked if he wanted dessert. That same night, I heard him on the phone in the garage, the place he went when he wanted privacy, which meant the prepaid phone I carried was pressed to my ear within 30 seconds. I could hear enough. He was talking to Terrence. His voice was low and satisfied.
She signed. We're good. Move the account tomorrow morning.
I heard Terrence say something I couldn't make out. Derek laughed. That laugh, the short, certain sound of a man who believes the game is already over.
She has no idea. She never did. I told you she's good at spreadsheets, not at the things that actually matter.
There it was again. That sentence. My own profession, my own competence thrown at me like evidence of my limitations by a man who had built his entire plan on the assumption that I would never look closely enough to see it. I stood in the hallway outside the garage door in the dark, and I let him finish his call. I let him have his moment of certainty. I let him enjoy what he believed were his last few days of holding all the power in this marriage.
He signed every paper, Camille, with a quiet satisfaction that I was only now fully understanding. He signed every paper and never once read the fine print. Because he never thought he had to. He was too busy making sure you didn't read yours.
Joe had told me that weeks ago. The court date was in 11 days. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not everything just what I needed. I arranged for a neighbor 2 doors down, Miss Arlene, a 72-year-old retired school teacher who had known something was wrong in that house for months and had never once pressed me about it, to hold a key for me. Not the key Derek knew about, the other one. 3 nights later, Derek locked me out of my own front door in 41-degree weather with blood on my hand and the absolute certainty that he had finally completely won. He turned off the porch light. He went silent. He waited for me to beg. I stood on that porch and looked at the key Miss Arlene had given back to me that afternoon, the spare I had made 18 months ago, and asked her to keep on a quiet Tuesday when something in my gut had told me to start preparing for a night exactly like this one. And I called a car. And I went to Joe's. And I slept better than I had in 4 years. Because tomorrow was the last day Derek Antoine Okafor would ever underestimate me. The Fulton County Courthouse on a Thursday morning in late November looks like any other government building from the outside gray stone wide steps, the kind of architecture designed to remind you that what happens inside carries weight. I had driven past that building 100 times in 15 years of living in Atlanta. I had never once imagined I would walk up those steps for my own marriage. I wore a navy suit. My mother had driven up from Macon the night before and pressed it for me while I sat at Joe's kitchen table going over documents one final time. Gloria Renee, 63 years old, who had never once said I told you so, who had simply shown up with her iron and her hands and her presence and asked what I needed. What I needed was exactly what she gave me. Nothing more, nothing less. Joe and I arrived 40 minutes early. We sat in the hallway outside the courtroom and went through everything one last time. The asset freeze documentation, Naomi's witness statement, the tax filings, the financial records, the evidence of coercion and control. 12 organized folders, every number verified, every date cross-referenced. Every piece of the case built the way I built every model I had ever constructed professionally, with the understanding that the only thing that mattered in the room was what you could prove. Derek arrived 17 minutes before the hearing. I heard him before I saw him, his voice carrying down the hallway with the particular confidence of a man who had convinced himself the outcome was already determined. He was with his attorney, a man named Caldwell, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics in high-asset divorces. Derek was dressed impeccably charcoal suit, fresh haircut, the whole performance. He looked like a man attending a victory ceremony who had decided to dress for the occasion. He saw me sitting in the hallway. He smiled. That smile, the one that didn't reach the eyes, the one I had learned to read like a weather system. He walked toward me slowly, deliberately, the way a person walks when they want you to feel their approach. He stopped a few feet away. He looked me over.
You really think you can take me to court, Camille? You got nothing. You never had anything that wasn't because of me.
He leaned in slightly.
Go ahead and try. I'll be home by noon.
I looked at him. I said nothing. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, and then I looked back down at the folder in my lap. He laughed that short, certain sound and walked away toward his attorney. Joe put her hand briefly on my arm. I shook my head slightly. I was fine. I was better than fine. I was the most fine I had been in 4 years. We filed into the courtroom. The hearing opened with Derek's attorney presenting their position that the investment account constituted Derek's separate business asset managed entirely by him, and that Camille Okafor had no substantive claim to its contents. Caldwell was smooth-practiced and completely unaware of what was about to happen to him. The judge, the Honorable Diane Mortimer, 58 years old with the kind of face that had heard every variation of every story and could not be moved by performance, listened without expression. Then Joe stood up. She presented the case in the order we had built it. First, the account documentation opened under both names, funded through joint marital assets over 6 years, with my name on every associated tax filing. Second, the legal precedent under Georgia law establishing joint ownership rights for marital assets, regardless of day-to-day management. Third, and here the room shifted almost imperceptibly, the emergency asset freeze already on record, filed and confirmed before Derek's attempt to transfer the account. Caldwell was on his feet. Your Honor, my client was unaware of any freeze order.
The order was filed and confirmed through proper channels?
Joe said that calmly.
The court has the timestamps. We also have a system log showing 3 attempts to access and transfer the account after the freeze went into effect.
She placed the document on the clerk's table.
Those attempts were made from a device registered to Terrence Okafor acting on behalf of the respondent.
The room went very quiet. I did not look at Derek. Not yet. I was waiting, Joe continued.
Your Honor, we also have a witness statement from a third party directly relevant to the respondent's financial conduct during this marriage.
The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Naomi Park walked in. I heard Derek's chair move. A small sound, the legs scraping the floor as his body registered what his mind was still refusing to process. I turned then. I looked at him directly for the first time since we had entered that room. The color was leaving his face. Not all at once, it drained slowly the way water empties from a glass, with a small crack at the base. The confidence that had walked down that hallway 17 minutes ago was gone. In its place was something I had never seen on Derek Antoine Okafor's face in 9 years of marriage. Panic. His jaw was set, but his eyes were moving from Naomi to Joe, to me, to the judge, to the documents on the clerk's table, and back again, cycling through the room looking for an exit that wasn't there. His right hand gripped the edge of the table in front of him. I watched his knuckles go pale. Naomi's statement was read into the record. Every transfer, every promise, every email where Derek had described in his own confident words a plan to defraud both the woman he was deceiving and the wife he was married to simultaneously. The courtroom listened in the particular silence of people who are hearing something they cannot look away from. When the clerk finished reading, Judge Mortimer set down her pen and looked at Derek over her glasses with an expression that was not angry and not surprised, and was somehow worse than either. Mr. Okafor, she said, your wife has been listed as co-owner of the account in question on every relevant legal document for 9 consecutive years, including joint tax filings she signed as the primary financial declarant in your household. Are you prepared to explain to this court how an account co-owned by your wife and funded through joint marital assets constitutes your separate property?
Your Honor, she wasn't involved in managing.
She wasn't involved because you deliberately excluded her, which is not the same thing as not having legal ownership. The documents establish that clearly.
Caldwell leaned toward Derek and said something in a low voice. Derek shook his head, a sharp, slightly desperate movement. His hand on the table was trembling now. Not dramatically, just slightly. The kind of trembling that a man tries to control and can't quite manage. Judge Mortimer looked at the asset freeze confirmation. She looked at the transfer attempt logs. She looked at Naomi's statement. She looked at 9 years of joint tax filings with Camille Renee Okafor's signature on every single one. Then she looked at Derek one more time.
Your Honor, we'd also like to enter into the record a document the respondent presented to my client 4 days ago for her signature, a waiver of her rights to the joint investment account, disguised within restructuring paperwork.
She placed it on the clerk's table.
My client did not sign it. But the fact that he presented it to her after the freeze order was already on record constitutes an attempt to circumvent a court order.
Caldwell stood up. He looked at the document. He looked at Derek. Then he picked up his briefcase, set it on the table, and began organizing his papers in a way that made very clear he was preparing to no longer be in that room as Derek's representative. Derek watched his own attorney packing up. Something in his face went slack. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to address the court directly, if I may." Judge Mortimer nodded. I turned and looked at Derek. For the last time as his wife, for the last time as the woman he had spent 4 years systematically trying to diminish, isolate, and defraud. I looked at him, trembling hands, gray face, the charcoal suit that was supposed to dress a victory that had just dissolved completely, and I said, "You told me I had nothing without your last name. You told me I was good at numbers on paper, but not at the things that actually mattered. You told me I didn't understand how the real world worked." I paused. "You signed every document I put in front of you for 9 years without reading a single line. Because you decided a long time ago that I wasn't worth paying attention to." I picked up my folder. "The real world just caught up with you, Derek." He stared at me. His mouth moved. No sound came out. "You're not sorry," I said quietly. "You're just sorry you got caught. And you know it." Judge Mortimer ruled that afternoon. The investment account $312,000 awarded to Camille Renee Okafor as marital property with additional financial restitution pending a full fraud assessment. The house under Camille's mortgage remained hers. Derek was ordered to pay Naomi Park's restitution from his remaining personal assets, a number that after the legal fees Caldwell submitted before withdrawing left him with almost nothing. A separate referral was made to the district attorney's office regarding Terrence's attempts to circumvent the court order. In the hallway afterward, Derek caught up with me near the elevator. His attorney was gone. Terrence was not there. Terrence had not come at all, which told its own story. Derek was alone in a way I had not seen him be since the night we met on that rooftop in Buckhead, when he had stood beside me and looked at the skyline and seemed for one genuine moment like a man who was telling the truth.
"Camille."
His voice was raw. The performance was completely gone.
"Please, I'll pay it back. All of it. Whatever you need. Just give me a chance to fix this. I'll change. I swear to you I will change."
I looked at him for a long moment. "Derek," I said, "you're not sorry. You sat in that courtroom this morning and told me I had nothing. You've been building an exit for 6 years. You used another woman's life savings. You had your own brother help you do it." I pressed the elevator button. "The only thing you're sorry about is that it didn't work." The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. I did not look back. 3 months later, I heard through Joe that Terrence had accepted a plea agreement, criminal fraud charges related to the transfer attempts his real estate license suspended, pending the outcome. Derek was living in a 1-bedroom rental in College Park. The charcoal suit I imagined had gone back into the closet. The car he had financed 2 weeks before the court date, the one he had signed for in absolute certainty that $300,000 was about to land in his account, had been repossessed by February. The rooftop in Buckhead was still there. The Atlanta skyline was still there. Derek Antoine Okafor was not a part of any of it anymore. 6 months after that courtroom, I woke up on a Saturday morning in October to the sound of leaves moving in the wind outside my bedroom window. Not the bedroom on Wyndham Lane. A different bedroom. Mine. I had found the apartment in Inman Park 3 weeks after the hearing, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a building with exposed brick walls and tall windows that let in the kind of morning light that makes everything feel like it has been newly washed. The rent was comfortable on my salary, which was now entirely my own, again deposited into an account with only one name on it. My name. The way it should have been from the beginning. I lay in bed that first Saturday morning in October and listened to the neighborhood wake up the same way I used to sit on the porch on Wyndham Lane and listen, except that this time the sound of it didn't carry any weight I hadn't put there myself. No waiting for footsteps in the hallway. No reading the temperature of a room before I entered it. No measuring my words before I spent them. Just leaves. Just wind. Just the ordinary, extraordinary sound of a morning that belonged entirely to me. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the street below the Saturday farmers market 2 blocks over, already setting up a man walking a dog so large it looked like a small horse, 2 kids on bikes weaving around each other on the sidewalk. Atlanta in October doing what Atlanta does, living. I thought about the woman who had stood outside a locked door 6 months ago with blood on her hand and a key she had prepared for exactly that moment. I thought about everything she had known even then that she hadn't yet let herself fully believe. My mother called at 9 that morning, right on schedule, because Gloria Renee had called me every Saturday morning at 9 for my entire adult life, and the only difference now was that I always answered. "How'd you sleep, baby?" "Like I've been sleeping for years," I told her. "The good kind." She laughed her real laugh, the one she reserved for moments she didn't have to perform anything for. There was a pause, the comfortable kind, and then she said, "I should have said more, Camille." When I could see what was happening, I should have pushed harder. I had been waiting for her to say that. I had known it was coming because I knew my mother knew how she carried things, how long she turned them over before she finally put them down on the table. "No, Mama," I said. "I had to learn it myself. You can't carry that. I'm your mother. I'll carry what I want to carry." I smiled into my phone. "Then carry this instead. I'm okay." "I'm more than okay. And you were right about the spare key." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I always am, baby." I had a standing Sunday dinner with my mother. Now she made the drive up from Macon once a month, and we cooked together in my kitchen and talked for hours. Not carefully, not with one ear listening for a door. Just talked the way women who love each other talk when they finally have the space to do it. Naomi and I had stayed in contact, not in a way that required explanation to anyone else, just 2 women who had navigated the same storm from different angles and understood something about each other that most people in their lives never would. We had coffee occasionally at a place in Ponce Highland that she liked. We talked about our work, our lives, the things we were building. She had gotten most of her $78,000 back through the restitution order and had put it into a legitimate investment fund, one she had researched herself carefully, thoroughly, the way she should have been able to trust herself to do all along. She was doing well. She was more than doing well. I was proud of her. I told her that once over coffee, and she had looked at me like she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. I told her to get used to it. Joe had submitted a formal complaint to the Georgia Real Estate Commission regarding Derek and Terrence's conduct, separate from the criminal proceedings. The commission had opened an investigation. Derek's real estate license was under review. Whether he kept it or lost it, I didn't spend much energy thinking about. What Derek did with the rest of his life was no longer data I needed to track. 3 months after the hearing, I was promoted. Director of Financial Strategy, a title that came with a corner office on the 16th floor and a team of 8 analysts who reported to me, and a salary that made the $312,000 in the investment account feel like a down payment on something much larger. My boss, a woman named Patricia Wynn, who had recruited me to the firm 11 years ago and had watched quietly while I navigated the last year of my life with more grace than she ever told me directly she admired, called me into her office to give me the news and said, "I should have done this 2 years ago. I'm sorry it took this long." I told her the timing was exactly right, and I meant it. Because here is what I know now that I did not know how to hold on to during the years I was losing myself piece by piece in that house on Wyndham Lane. Becoming who you are supposed to be is not always a straight line. Sometimes it requires a detour through the worst version of a situation you could have imagined for yourself. Sometimes the lock has to be turned against you before you understand the full value of the key you are already carrying. I know women who are sitting where I was sitting. In houses that don't feel like home anymore, in marriages that have been rearranged around someone else's comfort, while their own needs have been made to feel like inconvenience, in relationships with people who look them in the eye and say you're nothing without me and count on them to believe it, because the alternative believing you are enough on your own feels too large and too uncertain and too much like standing outside in the cold with no guarantee of what comes next. I want to talk to those women directly for a moment. You are already holding the key. You may not know it yet. You may have handed it to someone else for safekeeping and watched them use it to lock you out instead. But the key was made from something that belongs entirely to you, your history, your competence, your capacity to survive things you did not ask to survive. Nobody can take that. They can pretend it doesn't exist. They can spend years trying to convince you it doesn't exist. But it does. It always has. The spare key is not a plan. The spare key is a belief. The belief that you are worth the preparation, that your future is worth protecting before you know you'll need to protect it. That the door on the other side, the one that opens into the life you actually deserve, is one you have every right to walk through. I walked through mine. I am Camille Renee. I am 37 years old. I am a woman who kept her own key even when someone spent 9 years trying to convince me the door wasn't mine to open. And I am standing in my own kitchen in my own apartment in a city I love on a Saturday morning in October with a cup of coffee and a window full of light and a life that is entirely, completely, unreservedly mine. The most dangerous thing about a woman who knows her worth. She doesn't need your permission. She never did. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt familiar or gave you something you needed to hear today, drop a comment below and tell me. Tell me what hit hardest. Tell me where you are in your own story. Tell me what you're holding on to and what you're learning to let go of. Your words matter here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them is about women who found their key. Don't miss a single one.